During the period 650 CE to 1750 CE, many societies around the world underwent dramatic changes. As civilizations increasingly came into contact with each other, their values and beliefs were challenged and even changed. We'll look at 5 key civilizations, exploring who they were, what they achieved, and what happened to them. To do that, we need to start with ancient Rome, the capital of an empire that ruled from Britain to Africa and from Spain to Syria. Rome was the largest city in the world until Constantinople, also known as New Rome, took top spot. What happened to Rome? And why was Constantinople, practically on the other side of Europe, called New Rome? What's the connection? Let's pick it up in the 3rd century. The Roman Empire had expanded as far north as Britain. By the 4th century, the empire was under regular attack from warlike tribes invading its territories. Among these so-called barbarians were Germanic tribes that included the Angles and Saxons. These tribes sought a better life in other lands. In 395, after suffering a major military defeat, Roman leaders divided the empire into eastern and western sectors to make it easier to govern their huge territory. The Western Roman Empire went into decline and fell in 476. But the Eastern Empire, called Byzantium, thrived. The Byzantine Empire would become the wealthiest empire in Europe and West Asia, lasting for more than 1,000 years. At its heart was Constantinople, then the largest and grandest city in Europe. Located between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, where east meets west, it was a key city port along trade routes. The empire enjoyed a golden age under Emperor Justinian I, building new roads, bridges, aqueducts, baths, and other public works. Including the Hagia Sophia, completed in 538, it is still one of the largest and most impressive cathedrals in the world today. Justinian also reformed the existing Roman laws into the corpus of civil law, the foundation of the legal system of many Western nations. Byzantium was a different civilization to Rome, one that was Greek in culture and spirit. They even spoke Greek rather than Latin spoken by the Romans, and established their own rich tradition of art that has influenced Greek, Italian, Spanish, and Russian culture. In 1054, disputes within the Christian church led to a major split. The Byzantines considered themselves Christians, but not of the same church as the Romans. Most significantly, the Byzantines didn't recognize the Pope in Rome as the head of their church. The dispute led to the creation of the Eastern Orthodox Church, which today is the 2nd largest Christian church in the world. Hundreds of years later, in 1453, Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. Looking back to the Western Roman Empire, by 410, the last Roman soldier had left Britain, and in 476, the empire fell. Without the protection of the Roman army, Britain was vulnerable. Germanic tribes invaded, predominantly the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. They settled in southern Britain and mixed with the local Celtic tribes. Initially, there were many small tribal kingdoms, but over time they amalgamated. The Anglo-Saxon governments that developed in these kingdoms influenced the beginning of the Westminster parliamentary system that exists today. Two assemblies developed. First, the Witan, or the Witana Gemut, an assembly of nobles and bishops who advised the king. Each kingdom also had political representation at the local level in the shires. Called moots, local issues were discussed and resolved by local representatives from each village in the shire. They often took place in either halls or official hilltops, such as this man-made one in Scotland. In time, these two assemblies formed into a parliament with an upper and a lower house. However, Anglo-Saxon domination suddenly came under threat when Viking raiders landed on Britain's shores in 787. It was the beginning of 300 years of fierce battles across Britain. Up until 865, the Vikings conducted raids on Britain, plundered and pillaged, and then sailed back to Scandinavia with their stolen riches. Events took a dramatic turn when the Vikings decided to conquer land and settle in Britain. So began the Great Viking Invasion. So who were the Vikings? Where did they come from? The Vikings lived in Scandinavia, today's Denmark, Sweden and Norway, launching their raids in long ships not only across Britain but into northern and central Europe, as far as modern-day Russia. Some theories as to why they were leaving are major flood events and a shortage of good farmland in Scandinavia. While Vikings have a reputation as fierce warriors, they're also great traders and explorers, with extensive trading interests in honey, tin, leather, fur, iron and slaves. One explorer, Eric the Red, founded the first European settlement on Greenland, and his son Leif Erikson sailed as far as North America in the 11th century, establishing temporary settlements in modern-day Canada 500 years before Columbus. They even navigated their way down rivers through Russia and across the Black Sea to Constantinople, sometime in the 9th century. One Viking left his mark by carving Halfdan carved these runes on the floor of the Hagia Sophia, possibly as early as the 9th century. The Vikings were conquering and establishing settlements, and by 874, every kingdom had fallen to the Vikings, except for Wessex, ruled by King Alfred. Alfred had a problem. He was able to defeat the Vikings in battle, but couldn't win the war and push them out of Britain. In 886, King Alfred negotiated a treaty with the Vikings. The treaty saw Britain divided up. To the north and east was Danelaw, and in the south and west, under the rule of King Alfred, was the Kingdom of Angleland. The Kingdom of England was formed. However, fighting continued between the Vikings and Anglo-Saxons. 200 years later, the King of Norway, Harald Hardrada, led a Viking invasion, this time intent on taking the English throne. The King of England, Harold Godwinson, had trouble to the north and to the east, across the Channel, from the Normans. The Normans were from the Normandy region of France, and their leader, William the Conqueror, also had his eye on the English throne. King Harold Godwinson went on the offensive. He marched his army north and launched a surprise attack. They defeated the Vikings, killing their leader, Harold Hardrada. Just days after the victory in the north, Godwinson received news that the Normans had landed in the south. The decisive battle took place in Hastings. King Harold Godwinson was killed, and the Normans successfully invaded England. Anglo-Saxon rule in England had come to an end. It was the beginning of 300 years of Norman rule. But what about the Vikings still in Britain? Did they go back to Scandinavia? Historians consider the battle they lost to the English in 1066 to be the end of the Viking Age, as they stopped conducting raids and expanding territory. Most of the pagan Vikings blended into the society they'd settled in. The influence of Christianity was another possible factor. When much of Scandinavia converted to Christianity, it developed stronger connections with Christian Europe. So was this the end of the Viking warrior? Well, Viking warriors used their reputation to gain employment elsewhere. After the Norman conquest, both Vikings and Anglo-Saxon warriors were employed as personal bodyguards for emperors in Byzantium. So back to Constantinople. What was going on in the Byzantine Empire? As the 12th century closed, the empire had lost control of Asia Minor. The Silk Road, a profitable trade route stretching from Europe through Central Asia all the way to China, had closed. One man would change that. Not only would he reopen the Silk Road, he would go on to create the largest empire the world had seen. But it would last less than 150 years. This mighty ruler was Genghis Khan, Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. Led by Genghis, a small band of warriors who started out roaming the steppes of Mongolia quickly grew into an army that would conquer large areas of Asia, Russia, and Europe on horseback. At its peak, the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Central Europe. More than 100 million people were under its rule. The Mongols reopened the Silk Road, making it safe once again for traders and travellers. As a result, there was a greater exchange of culture and ideas between Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. It was the beginning of Eurasian history. The effects of events in one part of Europe were now felt globally, as far as Asia. Marco Polo, the famous explorer, visited China in 1260. He was in awe of China's Grand Canal, the great highways and public granaries. Marco Polo believed China was the centre of the world and was more advanced than Europe. For example, the Mongol Empire had adopted paper money, banknotes, instead of heavy coinage. Marco Polo met with Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, and travelled the longest canal in the world to the new Mongol capital of Beijing. Within just 20 years, the Mongol Empire was gaining momentum. With territories across northern China, it would become the first foreign dynasty to rule China. In 1279, the Mongol army, led by Kublai Khan, toppled the Song dynasty. Kublai Khan named his new dynasty the Yuan, which means creative force. Today, the yuan is China's unit of currency. Chinese culture flourished under the Mongols, particularly in the arts of painting, drama, and ceramics. But over time, traditional Chinese culture would dominate. The Khans tried to rule China as part of the Greater Eastern Mongolian Empire. But the territory proved too vast. In 1368, the Mongols were overthrown, bringing an end to the Yuan dynasty. As Genghis Khan himself once commented, conquering the world on horseback is easy. It is dismounting and governing that is hard. The fall of the Mongol Empire disrupted the stability of trade along the Silk Road. With the Byzantine Empire also in decline, Turkish tribes seized control of the western end of the Silk Road. As the Turks consolidated the tribes under one central leader, they formed the region's emerging power, the Ottoman Empire. Leader of the Turkish tribes of Anatolia, the Ottoman Empire would grow to rule a large part of the Middle East and Eastern Europe for more than 600 years. Inspired and sustained by Islam and its institutions, it was one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in history. Osman didn't force conquered peoples to convert to Islam. Religious tolerance may have encouraged greater loyalty to the empire. 150 years after Osman had founded the empire, the Ottomans, led by Mehmed the Conqueror, took Constantinople and renamed it Istanbul. Istanbul means City of Islam. The Ottomans gained control of the Silk Road, denying European traders access. They used their profits to finance wars to expand their empire. With the Silk Road cut off, Europeans were forced to search for new trade routes to the Far East, kicking off the Age of Discovery. This would see Europeans rediscover the Americas. The Ottoman Empire enjoyed a golden age in the 16th century. Political stability and wealth attracted the best minds of the Muslim world to Istanbul. Intellectuals, writers, artists, and craftsmen. But the empire was still hungry for further expansion into Western Europe. In 1683, the Ottomans were defeated at the Battle of Vienna by the army of the Holy Roman Empire. It marked the beginning of the end for the Ottomans. So the period of 650 to 1750 was one of incredible change and upheaval that has had a huge influence on the world we live in today.